The Vampire Diaries aired for the first time in 2009, almost 15 years ago, and somehow we still haven't been released from the shackles of this fascinating, convoluted salad of supernatural beings who have nothing better to do than to hang around 17-year-old high schoolers, because surely enough, if you've been given the ability to do pretty much anything through the power of compulsion and whatnot, hanging around a small town somewhere in Virginia, very much stuck in the past, is what you do. But I digress. This isn't gonna be that kind of video. For all of the things that there are to discuss about the Vampire Diaries, the lore has always been my favorite. The world building is very important to me because I'm the kind of viewer who will be questioning everything while watching. I can't help it. It's who I am, okay? So it's extremely painful for me to sit through something that hasn't been thought through. It ruins the whole experience for me. Now, so far, there have been 3 series in the Vampire Diaries universe, and obviously each has contributed to the overall lore of the series. But at the point where we are, none of these shows paint the entire picture of what the show's lore would come to be. So for shits and giggles, I thought, why not make a quick video kind of recapping, exploring, and connecting the lore of the Vampire Diaries universe in a clear and hopefully concise way. And here's my current dilemma with proceeding with this video. I don't quite know if I want to include the lore developed by the spin-off series Legacies, because from a personal standpoint, not only do I hate it and think for the most part that it's absolute bogus, but from an objective standpoint, I just don't think it fits in well. So yeah, by the time the video gets uploaded, we'll see if I end up including it or not. With that being said, let's get into the lore of the Vampire Diaries universe. But before we dive in, let's talk about this video's sponsor, Raycon. So today I'm excited to share something that's been a complete game changer for me, Raycon earbuds. Raycon is turning heads and shaking up the electronics industry. Their wireless earbuds offer incredible sound quality, and the best part, they start at half the price of other premium audio brands. Get ready for an exceptional listening experience. Raycon earbuds gives you a whopping 8 hours of playtime, and the battery life totals up to 32 hours. Seamless Bluetooth pairing ensures hassle-free connections, plus the compact design fits comfortably and provides a noise isolating experience, letting you immerse yourself in your favorite tunes. Here's what I love the most about Raycon: the earbud tap functions. With a single tap, you can toggle between 3 customizable sound profiles. Raycon also offers a stunning range of colors and patterns to suit your style, and you get to choose from a variety of fit options for maximum comfort. Personally, I use them every day now, whether I'm cooking, editing, working out, like you name it. It's part of my everyday routine now. Raycon was co-founded by Ray J, and guess what? Celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Melissa Etheridge, and Mike Tyson are just as obsessed with Raycon as I am. And here's the cherry on top. Raycon has a 30-day free return policy, but trust me, once you try them, you won't look back. So if you're ready to elevate your music experience, head over to buyraycon.com/VHS tape or click the link in the description box below to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Let's start in the 22nd century BC. The world's first psychic is born. His name is Arcadius. Psychics seemingly were a natural occurring phenomenon born with psychic abilities. We don't know their function or purpose in the natural world, but anywho, our boy Arcadius was all about good vibes, helping out neighbors, doing the right thing, like you get the picture. This would change because, well, a powerful man in his village with criminal thoughts riled everyone up in the village against him when Arcadius tried to tell him hey, maybe you shouldn't be thinking these things. Now here's where things get a bit heated. Literally, they tie up Cade and burn him at the stake. While he's there, burning and feeling an excruciating pain, physical and emotional, from the betrayal, he lets out this massive burst of psychic energy. It's so intense, it creates a whole new dimension. And what do we call this new hot place? Hell. Yeah, our man Arcadius accidentally invented hell. Talk about a rough day. Now, in 750 BC, a girl named Sybil is born with the same psychic abilities as Cade. Upon discovering her abilities, she was banished by her family and neighbors. They threw her into the sea, where she later washed ashore nearby an isolated island. Lo and behold, this is actually the island where Cade was from before suffering a similar fate. There's this other girl from another village with the same abilities who was also banished after her people discovered her psychic abilities. Her name was Celine. She was living alone on this island until Sybil arrived. She took Sybil under her wing, and the two of them became like sisters. Celine was butthurt and turned a little cuckoo, understandably so. She was living in isolation for however long, so you know how that goes. Celine taught Sybil to use her voice in conjunction with her psychic abilities to lure ships to the island in hopes of finding a way out. But what Sybil didn't know was that Celine was actually luring sailors from her village and savagely killing them. You know, in her head, they deserved it after everything they did to her. Anyway, after killing them, she would cook them and feed them to Sybil. So Sybil eventually found out what was actually going on and was completely hurt and disgusted by the whole thing. I mean, can you imagine if you found out this whole time that you were being fed human flesh? She was so disturbed by it that she decided to try to unalive herself by jumping off a cliff. And right before she died, Celine found her and prayed to God that he help her. And instead, some guy named Cade showed up. Cade accepted to help them, but with a price. He would make them both immortal, beautiful, and eternally young, but in return, they would feed upon the flesh and offer him the souls of the wicked. Celine accepted the deal, and they were both turned into Sirens and servants of Arcadius. So yeah, in short, Sirens were a supernatural species who were originally psychic and given immortality that depended on them feeding off of human flesh to remain young and beautiful. One must consent before being able to be transformed into one. They're like the oldest supernatural species in existence. Sybil claims to be over 3,000 years old, making Sirens older than immortals like Silas and Amara by at least 1,000 years. From then on, whenever a soul who has committed a bad deed would die, they would be sucked into this realm where Arcadius would feed off of their souls for the rest of eternity. Now, you didn't have to be completely evil to be sucked to hell. Some people just did a couple bad things and got captured by Sirens, and like the exact conditions are still a little iffy to me, but all in all, a whole range of people would end up in hell, both humans and supernatural, and this dimension would remain until 2018 when it was destroyed by the Mystic Falls gang. Okay, so I didn't want to include the Legacies lore, but I remember that they explained where magic comes from. So let's start there, since everything existing in this universe essentially comes from magic. For this, though, we have to go back to the 30th century BC real quick. Okay, so from my understanding, we're in some kind of a Hercules Zeus scenario with a half mortal, half divine being situation or whatever. This being is named Ben, and he has this birthright to be invincible in battle, which he uses to protect his village. One day, his lover slash bestie gets sick, and he decides he wants to cash in his perks that were never of any interest to him before. So he decides he's going to take Asher, that's his lover's name, Asher, to see his dad to get help. And at this point, the gods lived on top of a mountain, and there was a threshold that humans can cross. So Ben was forced to leave Asher down. And so he gets up the mountain, and Daddy's like, no, we won't be helping you, so deal with it. So now Ben's angry, and he steals the fire that our world would come to know as magic. It's important to know that the reason he gives away the magic is out of spite, because he couldn't save Asher and thought that others deserved the benefit from this magic that the gods were hoarding, basically. So from this chain of events, we can conclude that people who took the magic became the first witches. Some were good, some were bad, but essentially they would come to create everything else. So let's delve deeper into the witch world now. Now cut to the 1st century BC. The oldest witches that we know are Silas and Ketsia, and they were travelers. Ketsia, though, she was not your regular witch, okay? She was the first witch to successfully create an immortal being, and not just any kind of immortal being, one that essentially had no weaknesses or quote-unquote flaws. Here's how that went. Ketsia was down bad for Silas, and he knew that. The story gets complicated because Silas was from a noble family, and the girl that he was in love with, Amara, was not, so they couldn't be together. Silas, being the evil, toxic man that he is, decides to act like a boy and ask for Ketsia's hand in marriage, so to trick her into creating an immortality elixir so that they could be together forever. Ketsia creates this elixir as a wedding gift, but quickly realizes that she's been fooled when she gets jilted at the altar. Now, you know what they say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Also, imagine messing with the most powerful witch of all humanity who was able to create an immortality elixir without any flaws. You'd think not to mess with someone like that because surely enough she would destroy you in a blip. But no. Mr. over there was clearly thinking with his little head instead of his big one. Now, the thing that you will always hear in these shows is that nature has a balance. No matter what you do, nature will always find a balance. Basically, you can't do anything out of the ordinary without there having some consequences or side effects. What made Ketsia so powerful and her spells so incredible is that there was no balance, okay? Nature didn't do anything. There were no consequences apart from the ones that she created because she was pissed justifiably. So she sought to have revenge, and with that she created the other side, a place where supernatural beings in limbo would go after dying, and the cure for immortality. Now there's more to this story, but it includes other supernatural beings, and I don't want to mix everything up, so we'll get back to the story later. Here's the main takeaway from this though. Before all this drama, the witches in Greece lived in harmony, and then Ketsia did this wild thing that made all the other witches get mad at travelers and then curse them, which is how they came to become this specific tribe of witches, and this also created a divide in their witch community, the conventional and unconventional witches. I know people hate season 5 of the Vampire Diaries because it's such a hot mess, but honestly, to me, it was the last season that gave us such fascinating lore. So once we meet the travelers in the Vampire Diaries, they are the 2,000-year descendants of the first travelers that were cursed, and they're sick and tired of dealing with the consequences of their ancestors' fuck-ups. They aren't even allowed to gather around in big groups anymore or practice magic in a traditional way. You know, obviously they found ways around it, being passengers and all, but it's still not a fun way to live. So I get being salty and wanting to reverse what their ancestors did, which they started, and would end up making Mystic Falls a magicless town for a while. Now, before we learned about the travelers, we learned about the other witches and their covens. The witches aren't all the same. Some of them have special abilities, such as siphoners, who are born without the ability to generate their own magic, but possess the ability to siphon magic from external forces. Seers and oracles are witches that practice divination, which just means that they have the ability to see the past and the future. Furies and oracles were introduced in legacies. The difference between the two is that a fury is an oracle who changed the outcome of their vision, which granted them a connection with the minds of the gods, I guess. Legacies also introduced pyromancers, which are fire-breathing witches who are nearly extinct. Finally, there are also muses who have the special ability to inspire and only come if they're born from the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter. Now, those are all special rare abilities, but there are more general ones such as the obvious spell casting, channeling, telekinesis, elemental control, projection, telepathy, possession, illusions, dream manipulation, and resurrection. The witches exist in covens, and the covens act as large organizations, and you're meant to treat each member of it as if they were your own family and blood. Some covens are just family member covens, such as the Bennett coven, who are the most powerful witches to exist. Examples include Kitsia, Emily, and Bonnie Bennett. Each coven has their own set of rules and traditions they must follow. For example, the Gemini coven are the coven of twins that need to merge at the age of 25 in order to have a new leader and continue. The catch is that if their leader dies, they die too. The coven was at least 2,000 years old and were tasked with keeping track of the travelers in order to stop them from breaking the curse. The coven is apparently considered as the weirdo coven. New Orleans is said to have the largest number of witch covens. There are rules of conduct they must follow, and anyone who breaks them is severely punished or shunned, or both. There is a hierarchy of age. The elders are considered the highest of them all. The New Orleans witches use ancestral magic. Ancestral magic is a form of witchcraft that draws from consecrated witches. It's similar to spirit magic, but differs in that ancestral magic is limited to the area where said ancestors are buried. There's this other place called the Ancestral Plane that was created to separate the dead witches of New Orleans from the other side. To keep their connection with the ancestors alive, the New Orleans witches must perform a harvest every 300 years. In the harvest ritual, 4 young girls from the coven are sacrificed and kept in a state of limbo to prove their faith in their ancestors. Once this is done, the ancestors will reward them and resurrect the sacrifice and restore the connection. If they don't do the harvest, not only do they lose their ability to perform ancestral magic, which is the only magic that these specific people know how to do, the ancestors also get pissed and start sending them warnings in form of natural disasters, each disaster getting worse with time. Let me just quickly cover the anchor because I just have a feeling I'll forget about her. So the anchor was the supernatural being to which the spell that created the other side was bound to. Kitsia bound the world's first immortal woman, Amara, to the other side for centuries. So the anchor is basically like the supernatural bouncer for the other side. It's not a job you apply for, it's a job you get cursed with. Being an anchor means you gotta feel the pain of every death of supernatural creature that passes through you to get to the other side. Before Kitsia died, she transferred the status to Bonnie, but the other side didn't last too long after that. But we could see through Bonnie how painful and agonizing that job was. Alright, now back to the timeline. So it's somewhere around the 5th century and we're in what would become the United States. There are 2 warring tribes who decide to unify through the marriage of powerful witches. Once a child is conceived, the tribe elders come to the mother and basically feed it power in hopes that the child would become a symbol of prosperity. Little did they know that they were creating a power-hungry monster. So Inadu is born and she has an insatiable thirst for power because, they were feeding it to her throughout her entire development. She would grow to become more and more powerful and people were scared of her, and she also found enjoyment in that, and things just got worse. She became ruthless and unfeeling, and from there the hollow nickname would come. So now we're a couple of years ahead, and at this point Inadu is beyond saving. I mean, she's sacrificing people to get more power, and so everyone around her is fed up and they decide they're going to take her down. So they gather some wolves and come together because they know that the wolves will destroy her and essentially guarantee that she'll be dead once the witches kill her with the enchanted axe. Before she died though, she left them with one little souvenir, a curse that would be passed down from one generation to the other. That curse would be known as, drumroll please, the werewolf curse. Because there were 6 elder witches plus her mom, the curse would be separated into 7 bloodlines: the Labanoir, the Malru, the Deepwater, Berry, Bazrock, Paxson, and the Poldark. I am so sorry if I pronounced those the wrong way. So sorry. Anyway, mechanics of the curse work like this. Every full moon, without exception, anyone from this bloodline who has activated the curse will turn into a werewolf. The only time transformation doesn't occur is if a wolf is pregnant, an evolved witch, which I'll get into in a minute, or if they have a moonlight ring. The reason she chose werewolves is pretty obvious to me, but I think it's very interesting that in order to activate your curse, you must kill someone, the same way the elders and her mother's curse were activated after they killed her. The process of turning into a werewolf is an excruciatingly painful one. Every bone in your body will break before you complete your transformation. At the end of it, you lose all human consciousness. Rage and aggressivity is said to be a common trait in werewolves. They usually have superhuman strength, although not as much as vampires. Werewolves are hardwired to kill vampires on sight when they're in their wolf form, but when there are no vampires to kill, they'll kill humans. Even the wolves that haven't triggered their curse apparently can harm a vampire. They have a venomous bite that will kill any regular vampire it bites. In order to avoid harming some people, some of them will tie themselves up during a full moon, but most of the time it's not enough to stop them from breaking off. Untriggered werewolves can be compelled by vampires. So since the wolves were divided in 7 bloodlines, their special abilities were also divided between the 7 bloodlines. Some had super strength while others had super speed, and so on. As time went on, they realized that when 2 alphas from different packs get married by a shaman, otherwise called a unification ceremony, they would be able to adopt each other's abilities while keeping their own, and that's how over time they would come to have all the same abilities. Now I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead here because once we get to the originals, hybrids now exist, and Haley, who's now a hybrid, and Jackson, now the alpha wolf, get married and united their packs. Because of Haley's hybrid abilities, these wolves now have the ability to control their transformation, are basically no longer at the mercy of the moon or dependent on moonlight rings and so on. Oh, and they're also immune to silver, which regular werewolves aren't, and their species is called evolved werewolves. Alright, now back to the timeline. So somewhere around 970 AD in Norway, a village is attacked by Vikings. The Vikings kill everyone except for these 2 sisters because they realize that they're witches after seeing them perform magic to keep them away. These sisters are called Esther and Dahlia is the older protective one. So in order to protect her sister from evil, she decides to do all their bidding and perform dark magic. So Esther, the younger sister, eventually falls in love with one of their Viking captors, Michael. When they decide they're going to get married and start a family, Dahlia feels betrayed and hurt and is left heartbroken. Fast forward to a year or so later, they're married and now they want to have children, but Esther is having difficulty conceiving. Esther then asks Dahlia to help her conceive a child with magic, and at this point Dahlia is like still salty about the whole thing, and like she's telling her like, girl, if you like hadn't left behind magic, you'd be able to help yourself. But you know, being reminded of their always and forever promise, Dahlia agrees to do it, but for a price, and this price would be the firstborn of every Michelson generation. So within a year, Esther gives birth to Freya, and as promised, Dahlia takes her away when she's 5 years old and her magical powers start to become strong. When Dahlia came to pick up Freya though, Esther, she wanted to like play dumb and act like she had amnesia or whatever and resist the deal, to which Dahlia reminded her like, not only do you have to fulfill this deal, every born of every next generation is also bound to follow it too. So once Freya is taken away, Esther is pissed and hurt and decides to start using magic again. Like, yeah, finally. And also between this time, they also had another boy named Finn, and I mean their story doesn't end here, but Freya is taken away while Michael is away at battle, and when he comes back, Esther lies and says that she died from the plague or something like that. This news would change Michael forever by causing him to become distant and withdrawn with the rest of his family, and yeah. A year later, Elijah is born, and in the late 990s, the Michelson family is told about a new world where people were healthy and blessed with gifts of strength and speed, and lo and behold, these people that were being described were none other than werewolves. So the Michelson family aligned with other Norwegian Vikings to move to what would become Mystic Falls. You know, at this point, the whole werewolves thing wasn't like really a secret and everyone was getting along really well. On full moons, the Vikings would hide inside an underground cave system to keep them safe. During this time, 4 more Michelsons were born: Niklaus, Cole, Rebecca, and Henrik. Klaus, however, was later revealed to be a product of an affair between Esther and a powerful werewolf alpha named Ansel. Since in order to trigger the werewolf curse one must kill, Esther lived in perpetual fear that Klaus would trigger the curse once he killed someone and reveal her infidelity. To be honest, this was a very valid risk, as not only do werewolves genetically have anger issues, being a Viking, you're very likely to kill someone. So to cover her up, Esther creates a starling necklace for Niklaus that would make him physically weak. This sort of backfires in a different way because Michael starts abusing Klaus because he didn't have the only thing that he valued in an offspring: strength. This is how Klaus would become a vengeful, violent, and paranoid person. So a few years later, in the year I think 1001, Esther and Michael would lose another child, but this time it would be to werewolves after Henrik snuck out and got killed by one. After this second loss, Esther was determined to never lose another child again, so she got inspiration from the immortality spell that Kitsia performed on Silas and Amara. She went to her mentor Ayana and asked her for magical help, and Ayana refused, saying that what Esther wanted to do would upset the balance of nature and that if Esther did what she planned, she would start a plague. Michael insisted and convinced Esther to change the Michelson family into mortals, so shortly after the village celebrated some pagan holiday, Esther used a tweaked version of the immortality spell to turn the Michelson family into immortals. Esther turned her husband and the children into immortal for 2 reasons. The first one, the obvious one, she wanted to protect the rest of her family from losing more members to werewolves, and second, she wanted to keep them from having more witches, since she knew that immortals as undead creatures couldn't have biological children, as she knew that Dahlia planned to come back to claim any firstborn children Finn, Elijah, Klaus, Cole, or Rebecca might have. The irony about the first reasoning cracks me up because werewolves would still be the only creatures that were lethal to vampires at that point, so in that sense it wouldn't do jack shit. In the spell, she used a small amount of Tatya's blood, which she voluntarily gave to her. Tatya's blood was a strong binding agent in witchcraft because she was the first Petrova doppelganger to be born after Amara became immortal. For reference, there are 2 explanations as to why doppelgangers exist. The first one, doppelgangers, also known as shadow selves or mortal shadow selves, were supernatural/natural occurrences. Silas and Amara broke the natural law that all living things must die after becoming true immortals by taking Katsia's immortality elixir. Nature struck a balance by producing mortal shadow cells capable of death. As a result, doppelgangers have existed as long as immortals have existed, having been born and killed in place of Silas and Amara. The other explanation is that Marcos, who is the leader of the Travelers, casts a spell on the two respective lines of doppelgangers to draw them together so that they could eventually break the curse on their people by harvesting the blood of the sole remaining doppelgangers of each line. Now back to Esther. After using Tatia's blood, she also asked the sun to give her life and the old white oak tree to give her immortality. Now the spell worked, they would become immortal beings, but she specifically used elements of nature by going against nature, and one thing we know, again, is that nature finds a way to balance things out. Because Esther used the sun for life, they could never go out in the sun again because it would burn them to death, even though, they would resurrect later. And she asked the oak tree for immortality, which would be the only other thing that would kill them. And obviously, because she used doppelganger blood as a binding agent, they would need to consume blood forever in order to stay strong and survive, or else they would desiccate. Shortly after, the newly turned original vampires mistakenly killed their first humans, demonstrating that all-consuming appetite for blood. Klaus immediately began shifting into a werewolf after killing his first human, revealing his newly activated hybrid nature and revealing that Klaus was not Michael's biological son, but rather a product of Esther's affair with Ansel. So Michael was outraged at his wife's betrayal. Again, very obvious action. And the spirits, on the other hand, were determined to restore nature's balance, which had been upset when Klaus's hybrid nature rendered him practically invulnerable. So to make amends, Esther cursed Klaus again, great mom by the way, with the remaining doppelganger blood left in Tatia's lifeless body as a binding agent, which bonded his werewolf bloodline and effectively rendered the majority of his werewolf powers dormant. So again, Michael was pissed and he fell into a rage after finding out that Klaus's biological father was the chief of the werewolf pack whose member murdered his son Henrik. He killed at least half of their town, including Ansel and the majority of his pack, and this deed would eventually spark a conflict between the two species that would, that is still ongoing. However, enough members of Ansel's family survived for his bloodline to live into the 21st century. Klaus also felt betrayed by his mother's lies, and so he strangled Esther to death and said that it was Michael's fault. This made his siblings angry, so they turned their backs on their father. And after Esther died, Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca left the family home to get away from their father. They swore to stay together, and so that's where Old Ways and Forever came from. So yeah, soon after they left for the old world, and now a whole lot of drama happens after that, and I'll spare you the details, but one thing leads to another, and the Michaelsons are now in France trying to assimilate, and they get into a bunch of quote-unquote entanglements, and these entanglements would lead to some century-long beefs. But long story short, a guy named Lucian tried to stab Klaus after some drama, thinking it would kill him. Obviously, it didn't do any permanent damage, but it did heal the wounds that Lucian had right before stabbing him. Now, because Klaus's blood healed him, homeboy thought that, he had become the same creature as Klaus, and so he tried to go and kill this other guy he was beefing with, Tristan, and since he was still immortal, he would end up dying. Like, he would lose, the altercation. And so they organized a Viking funeral for him, and, right before they could complete the funeral, Lucian would wake up from the dead and, shortly after just feed off a human and complete his transition. He was the first human to be turned into a vampire after the Michaelsons. So after the originals accidentally found out that they could turn humans into more of their kind by giving them blood and killing them, the number of vampires grew rapidly over the centuries. And, that's how the species was fully made into, what it became. But it did soon become clear that the original vampires' progeny were much weaker than them, even if they were close to them in age. This gave the originals a high status that made them, the other vampires respect them. After some more vampires were created, they also discovered that they could compel other vampires and humans, and mind compulsion, started. So mind compulsion is the power of immortals, of original vampires, and hybrids to control the minds of another person or thing just by looking at them. Witches and sirens can also use this power to do the same thing through spells and direct touch, respectively. So far, each species has been shown to be able to wipe a victim's memory or even change them to the point that the person is no longer the same person. Okay, so let's quickly talk about the mechanisms of being a vampire before we move on. So to become a vampire, you must die with vampire's blood in your system, but in order to complete the transition, you must feed on a human within 24 hours or else you'll die. Once you turn into a vampire, everything you experience becomes heightened. Emotions, sensations, all of it. In order to stay strong, a vampire must regularly consume blood. It doesn't matter how much regular food they eat. If they don't have blood, they can't function. All of their organs will function normally, which means that if they eat, they'll digest and go to the bathroom. And vampirism can cure every disease except for cancer. So if you die with cancer, you'll just become a vampire with cancer. Not fun. Dark magic keeps vampires in the same physical state that they were when they died. This means that the vampire's body looks the same as a newly dead corpse, even though it's brought back to life and protected from decay. The true face of a vampire is a slightly changed version of their human face. It has red, bloodshot eyes with veins that stick around the eyes and longer fangs. As vampires are known to have very sharp and strong teeth, their bites are so strong they can sever the limbs of both animals and humans. Because a vampire in transition isn't really dead or alive until they decide to either finish their transformation or stop eating and die, this puts the semi-vampire in a strange space between the two states, which can have different effects on them. For example, a vampire in transition is immune to the effects of dark magic, which is said to be a form of impenetrable barrier through which nothing living or dead can pass. Also, until a person in transition drinks human blood to finish changing, they won't have the usual weaknesses of a vampire. This means they can walk in the sun and go into homes without being invited, because yes, that's also a thing. Vampires can enter enter a home without being formally invited. Vervain is another one of their weaknesses. If they ingest vervain, it'll hinder all their abilities, and physical contact with it will burn their skin. Vampires also can't compel anyone with vervain, and since the original vampires can compel them, they'll sometimes painfully ingest a bit of vervain in order to avoid being compelled by them. Vampires also have a weakness to wood. It takes them longer to recover from wooden wounds, and if they're staked in the heart, they'll fully die. Speaking of the heart, that's another way you can permanently kill a vampire, by pulling out their heart. Oh, and by decapitating them too, that's another way. So unlike the other supernatural groups, the vampires are more loners that tend to live a nomadic life, which makes sense. It would be extremely weird to stay somewhere for more than 20 years and not have people question why you haven't aged a day. The only active vampire community that we know of is in New Orleans. The sub-city was initially ruled by the originals, who somewhat founded it, and later by Marcel Gerard. The vampires in this area do follow a set of rules that, if violated, are faced with strict punishment. One of those rules is to never kill one of their own kind. I'm pretty sure they're also supposed to feed on tourists to avoid raising suspicions, but I could be wrong. It's also revealed that some vampires have like secret societies like the Strix and everything. It's not that interesting, but it's a thing. In the world of vampires, age is a powerful status symbol. One reason for this is the vampire's long life gives them a lot of knowledge, which gives them bragging rights in the community, especially when the older vampires like show up and, start bragging about their knowledge to like the younger werewolves and witches and humans. But the main reason it's a status symbol is because in the vampire world, the older the vampire is, the stronger they are physically. So as a vampire gets older, their supernatural powers, both in their body and in their mind, get stronger and more advanced. Coolest thing about the originals is that not only were they stronger than all other vampires until the upgraded ones existed, but their sire lands also prevented them from being able to get killed, because every existing vampire is tied back to one of the original 6. If they die, the entire line will die within an hour. Until the sire land was broken, it was honestly such an awesome catch-22. Another interesting thing about sire lands are sire bonds. In the vampire and hybrid species, a sire bond is a link between the sire and the sired. The sired shows its loyalty by following both direct and indirect orders from the sire. It's rare in the vampire species, but more likely to happen in the hybrid species. How two vampires are connected is different from how two hybrids are connected. The connection between two hybrids seems to be based on gratitude, while the connection between two vampires seems to be based on love. The bond is at its strongest when the sire is within the presence of the sired. To break a sire bond, they have to turn into a werewolf until it doesn't hurt anymore. With vampires, the masters can have the sire to turn off their humanity. Oh, that's another thing that vampires can do, turn off their humanity. This helps them deal with the fact that they have to feed on humans and sometimes even kill in order to stay alive, or simply to use it as a coping mechanism for hardships that they're going through, especially since everything they feel is enhanced. So let's see, what are some strengths and abilities I haven't mentioned? Oh yeah, super strength, super speed, super agility, super sense, so increased smell, sight, hearing, and you get the gist, and super durability, super healing, and I think tactile telepathy. So in my head, as I know of, there are two types of hybrid kinds that were introduced to the show. The first one was the crossbreed between werewolf and a vampire. Remember how one of the original vampires, Niklaus, is actually the biological son of a wolf? Well, somewhere around 2011 or so, he finally successfully managed to become a hybrid after he was able to get his hands on a new Petrova doppelganger, Elena Gilbert. The first one, Catherine Pierce, having escaped for 500 years and all. So once he becomes a hybrid, he starts a new mission when he starts siring other wolves to become hybrids. This ends up becoming more complicated than expected when his first attempts continuously die before being able to fully complete their transition. You see, again, for vampires, they just need to feed on human blood in order to complete their transition, but nature decided to make it a little more complicated for hybrids. They can only complete their transition with the blood of a Petrova doppelganger. If the doppelganger becomes a vampire though, the blood becomes useless. Apparently after the birth of Klaus's child Hope, yes, because he is part werewolf and he's able to conceive, we find out that her blood is strong enough to complete a transition because she's a tribrid. She's a wolf, a witch, and a vampire. The other kind of hybrids are the siphoner vampires. The heretics were a powerful group of witches and vampires who were once part of the Gemini Coven. The thing with heretics were that they were sort of the rejects from the witch community. I mentioned this before, but the Gemini Coven is seen as the weirdos of the witch community. The siphoner witches are also generally looked down upon in the community for not being able to generate their own magic. The members of the Gemini Coven considered these traits to be an abomination and denounced them before exiling them from the coven. Because siphoners have no magic of their own, but instead possess the ability to siphon magic from others, when they're turned into a vampire, the siphoner witch retains their ability to siphon magic, and as a vampire, they siphon from themselves to cast spells. After they turn into vampires, witches actually become fearful of them because now they can use their magic and they're way more powerful than them. Supernatural hunters are humans who are endowed with supernatural abilities to hunt and kill vampires through magical means. They're considered supernatural species despite being humans and reside on the other side when they die. In the early 1000s, a witch who was dying brought together 5 men who were probably soldiers led by some guy named Alexander, and so she cast a spell to make them work together. The Brotherhood of the Five were spelled by witches to kill vampires. However, their utmost task was to kill Silas. The witch's dying breath sealed the spell, which gave them superhuman physical skills so that they could fight vampires and it gave them a strong desire to kill them whenever they saw one. The witch also gave them something else, a mysterious tattoo on their right arm and chest that would become known as the Hunter's Mark. The tattoo was a plan that led Alexander to what he called the ultimate weapon. That thing he was referring to was actually the cure for vampirism. Apparently, the symbol of their unity was carved on their swords, which was the only way for them to read the map. I don't know. That part is really confusing to me. Anyway, so the Hunter's Curse is an automatically enacted curse when any supernatural hunter of the Brotherhood of the Five is slain by that which they hunt. The curse causes its victims to be psychologically tortured by the specific hunter after death by creating powerful hallucinations, slowly bringing them to a madness that coaxes them into taking their own life. When a hunter is killed, the hunter's mark appears on another person, and that person starts to feel the changes that come with being a hunter. After Niklaus killed the original 5 hunters, all of them had to be replaced, and this took 52 years, 4 months, and 9 days, and that's also when the hunter's curse broke and Niklaus was freed from the torture. From that point on, there have only ever been 5 hunters at a time, and most of the time they don't even know each other or what their job is. But the more vampires they kill, basically, the bigger their mark become, which could no longer be seen by anyone except for the hunters. Reyna was the daughter of one of the members of the Brotherhood of the Five. She admired him and wanted to be like him. One day her father was attacked and defeated by a vampire named Julian, and right before killing his father, Reyna intervened in an effort to save her dad and informed Julian that if he killed her father, he would be afflicted with the Hunter's Curse. That would backfire because instead of killing him, he would compel Reyna to do it instead in order to get rid of him and avoid the Hunter's Curse altogether, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So now the 8 Everlastings were a group of 8 shamans that sacrificed their lives to make the spell that turned Reyna Cruz into a supernatural huntress. They gave her a tea of protection, shielding Reyna from any magic used to harm her. They gave up their own lives and cast a spell on Reyna that gave her powerful abilities that would help her kill vampires, like making her stronger than ancient vampires, making her age slower, giving her the natural urge to kill vampires, being able to find any vampire she stabbed with her phoenix sword, and giving her multiple lives so that she could come back from the dead. She also got the phoenix sword, which was the sword that her father gave her when she was a girl. The shamans turned the stone in the hilt of the sword into the phoenix stone as a gift to her. This gave Reyna 2 powerful and magical items that, when used together, can trap a vampire soul in a stone and force it to live in hell for all time. It also lets her find any vampire that she marked with the sword. Okay, so let's talk about a medium real quick. Because they had been resurrected from a non-supernatural death, mediums were people who could communicate with the dead on the other side. They're not believed to be supernatural species, unlike doppelgangers and supernatural hunters who go to the other side when they die. The acquisition of mediumship is viewed as an undesirable supernatural consequence. Humans can become mediums if they die a natural death and are resurrected by a witch using either magical or medical means, granting them a connection to the dead. They don't exist anymore because the other side was destroyed, but yeah, also really boring species. Okay, now let's talk about enchanted objects, some of which I've already covered. The first one is the Ascendant. So Ascendants are mystical relics that formerly belonged to the Parker family. An Ascendant can be used to draw upon the power of a celestial event in order to open a portal to a prison dimension and permit passage through it. Why a prison dimension, you ask? Well, the Gemini Coven used these relics to create mystical timeouts for their rule-breaking members. You know, the ones who just couldn't play nice or just turned too dangerous for everyone else. It's like a magical version of go to your room and think of what you've done. But the other room is another dimension and you can't come out of it until you've cooled your magical jets. Ascendants can only be activated with the blood of a Bennett witch with the power of a celestial event. If someone is standing within the circle of light while holding the Ascendant, they can be teleported to another dimension. In addition, an Ascendant can be used to locate the positions of celestial bodies, enabling one to determine where the power of celestial event is concentrated. Bone daggers are a form of supernatural dagger that could be used to kill certain hellspawn. It was rumored to have been fashioned from death using the remains and bone of Arcadius and Hellfire's fire to create glass. The Daylight Ring is a piece of jewelry with a lapis lazuli stone. Sorry if I butchered that. And that stone has been enchanted by witchcraft to protect vampires from the sun. So, you know, they can like freely walk around during the day. There's no problem. By the way, it doesn't have to be a ring. Like the girlies on the show wear like bracelets and necklaces and everything. It just needs to have the gemstone and be enchanted. Okay, now the Gilbert Ring. Okay, so Jonathan Gilbert was a scientist who lived in Mystic Falls in the 1800s and was a member of the founding families that hunted vampires. A descendant from the Bennett witches, Emily, would enchant his failed inventions to work, which resulted in things like the Gilbert Compass and the Gilbert Ring. The Gilbert Compass could detect and track down vampires in its vicinity, and the Gilbert Ring protects its non-supernatural wearers from death by supernatural means, allowing them to resurrect upon being killed. The Moonstone was a mystical object used to bound the hybrid curse that was placed on Klaus, and the Moonlight Ring was a piece of jewelry with a black kyanite stone that witches have put a spell on so that werewolves can control their transformation and don't have to change every full moon. The Phoenix Stone, also known as the Hell Stone, was also a stone that trapped vampire souls in them, and like they were just tortured the whole time they were there. Okay, the Staff of Arcadius was a long ancient metal instrument that resembled a supernaturally derived tuning fork. When struck, it emanates a powerful frequency that hinders the psychic abilities of sirens. Once rung, the sound prevents further mind control, though it must be struck again to maintain its effectiveness. It can be used to sever psychic connections between sirens and servants. Not only does it affect their powers, but it also has the same effect as agony and can mentally and physically stun them. In addition, since witchcraft is anchored in psychic energy, it has a moderate effect on witches and siphoners, causing them to suffer from severe splitting headaches. The Maxwell Bell was a supernatural church bell atop Mystic Falls clock tower. It was initially enchanted by Bennett witches to drive the sirens away from Mystic Falls, but it was later corrupted to open a portal to hell, granting it ability to summon hellfire. Since the bell has been to the Staff of Arcadius, the staff's effect have been considerably amplified, so much so that it can cause hell's psychic boundaries to diminish and collapse. Due to this, ringing the bell 11 times could potentially activate a portal to hell. Thus, spirits could flee the torment of hellfire, although they would remain bound to hell and could only return to life with Arcadius' permission. If the bell is rung 12 times by a Maxwell, the gates of hell will be breached and hellfire will be released. The Tunde blade is a bone blade created by a witch named Papa Tunde. He used sacrificial magic to absorb the power of those he killed with it, or to draw on the power of them by carving sigils onto them. Apparently, the bone came from the Hollow, whose entire existence was about sucking power from other supernaturals, so that makes sense. It's one of the few objects known other than the white oak stake and white oak ash daggers capable of severely incapacitating an original vampire or Klaus. The blade is able to render an original vampire immobile due to the excruciating pain that it inflicts upon those who are stabbed with it. Okay, a traveler knife is a mystical blade that has the power to permanently kill a passenger without killing the host in the process. The white oak stake was a very powerful object and the only physical weapon on Earth with the capability to permanently kill an original vampire. The white oak ash daggers are a weapon which were forged by witches as a means of subduing the original vampires. If they're dipped in the ashes of the white oak tree, which dates back to the beginning of the vampire race, and put in the heart of an original vampire, they desiccate almost immediately, rendering them quote-unquote dead for as long as the dagger is in the heart of the original. I wanted to cover the dimensions, but I realized that I've talked about most of them while discussing the different races, but I'll just go over them again real quick. Okay, so the ancestral plane was a supernatural dimension in which the deceased ancestral witches of New Orleans resided. It was a bit like the other side, but it was only for witches, and only consecrated witches have access to this plane. Witches that reside in the ancestral plane retain their ability to practice magic. Okay, hell. Hell was a supernatural dimension of misery and fire created by Arcadius thousands of years ago. It was a fiery realm populated by every soul, both human and non-human, that has failed to find peace or had been denied access to the other side. Okay, the other side. The other side was a supernatural dimension where the spirits of the dead supernatural beings resided in a state of purgatory or limbo. It was created by Katsia with the intention of forcing Silas to spend an eternity with her on the other side instead of moving on and finding true eternal peace with his soulmate Amara. Okay, limbo. Limbo is a place of life that is kind of like a purgatory. It looks like the natural world without people and the sun never rises. This place is for both humans and supernatural beings. You can even end up here if you're in a coma. Spirits of people who have recently died often show up on this plane of existence for a short time before moving on to their afterlife. There's like a whole coin system put into place in order for souls to move on and find peace. This is overseen by a ferryman or fairy woman at one point. In order to gain the coin, you must atone for your mistakes in a sincere way. There's no cheating. And finally, the bright world, also known as Valhalla. I'm so sorry again, probably butchered that. Or finding peace, is a supernatural dimension of peace and the ultimate destination one takes in the afterlife. It's a beautiful realm populated by every soul, both human and non-human, that has successfully found peace. The bright world is a peaceful realm that seems to be different from everyone, and despite being a supernatural realm, the souls there are able to live as if they were still alive. Okay, so I think I'm gonna stop here. I just had to put a limit for myself because there's so much to talk about with the show. Like, it is never ending, and I didn't really talk about some parts of Legacies. I could dive deeper into the lore of Legacies. If it's something that's like requested, I could do it. I could do a part 2. There's also little details I left out because if not, the video would probably be too long and too confusing. So I decided that I'm just going to end it here. So I hope you enjoy the video. I maybe made mistakes. The comment section is open for that anyway. So, and there's probably important things maybe that I left out. So comment those down below. Like, let's have a chat about it. If there's something that I love talking about is the Vampire Diaries lore. It's so fascinating to me. I'm like obsessed with it. So yeah, if you got to this point, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please again, comment and like and subscribe for more content. Always feel free to add your suggestions. And yeah, thank you again. And I'll see you next time.